Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress reporting on round 7 of the 2018 Sinquefield Cup. And a special round it was. The prologue of the World Championship match in November in London. In round 7 they played the last game before that match against each other. Round 7 saw 4 draws: Aronian against So, Anand Grishuk, Karyakin Mamedyarov and Vachier-Lagrave against Nakamura. We have quite a high drawing percentage in this tournament, but of course all eyes were on the game there in the middle. World champion Magnus Carlsen against his challenger Fabiano Caruana. They have played so far 32 classical games against each other, 17 draws. Carlsen won 10 times, Caruana won 5 times. They played each other 3 times before in the Sinquefield Cup, 1 win by Caruana, 1 by Carlsen, and last year was a draw. And there was something else at stake, the number 1 position in the world rankings. Carlsen is first, Caruana is second, but if Caruana would win this game, they would switch places. Caruana would take on the number 1 position on rating. Here we see the handshake before the game, Carlsen on the right, Caruana arriving there on the left. And this is a more clear picture from the other side of the board. Both players waiting for the game to start. Let's get into the game. It was very exciting and we also saw some controversy. The game was played on the 25th of August 2018. White is Carlsen, black is Caruana. E4, E5, and to avoid the Russian defense, the Petrov defense, Carlsen had played bishop c4 on the second move in the past against Caruana. But here he played knight f3, allowing the Petrov, which Caruana played with knight f6. The main line is followed. Knight is kicked back, knight back to f3, and then take on e4. About 30 years ago, d4 was the main move, and then black plays d5. But nowadays, knight c3 is played a lot. And that was Carlsen's choice. Caruana took, and Carlsen took with the d-pawn, taking away from the center, but that is to get quick development with bishop e3 and queen d2 and castling queenside. Bishop e7, there goes that bishop, knight c6, and here a surprising move, bishop c4 instead of the normal queen d2. Other moves are bishop d3 or bishop e2, but as said, Carlsen chose bishop c4. A move that has not been tested yet at Grandmaster level. This was the first time it was played in a Grandmaster game. One idea, as was explained by the Grandmasters Ashley and Sarah in a live broadcast, is that black is now very unlikely to play bishop e6. And that means that it's also unlikely that he will castle queenside. The most logical way for black to play is to castle kingside, and then white can castle queenside, and we get a game with opposite castling, which guarantees a sharp game. That's one of the ideas of bishop c4. After bishop c4, Caruana indeed castled kingside, the most logical move. Queen d2, bishop f5, and Carlsen went with his king to the queen side. Queen d7, king b1, tucking the king away even further in the corner, and rook fe8. h4 with a possible idea of knight g5 to put pressure on the f7 pawn with those 2 pieces. Bishop f8, and not knight g5 but h5 was Carlsen's choice, and now the question is, how dangerous is h6? Caruana didn't like it, and that's why he played h6 himself. He must have judged that he did not want to allow white's pawn to land on h6. Bishop e2, a surprising move, and it was Grandmaster Ramirez who explained that this move doesn't do much, but it's hard to play against. Carlsen wants to probably move knight f3 away to allow his pawn storm on the king side. Then black would play knight e5 if that happens, if the knight goes away from f3, and that would then hit that bishop on c4 if it had still been there. Also, the bishop looks nice on c4, but is actually somewhat misplaced there. So Carlsen re-employs the bishop on the diagonal where it will support a possible g4 and f4. That's how the grandmasters explained this move. One way to prevent g4, which is one of white's ideas, is to put a piece on that square, then no white pawn will appear there. Knight h2, indeed, Carlsen wants to go forward with his kingside pawn, so he plays the knights away. The bishops were swapped, and knight e5. Bishop c1, a move that the grandmasters really liked. It's a prophylactic move, going out of the way of the reach of the knight. When the knight jumps to c4, it's not hitting that bishop that was on e3. And also any possible checkmates. When a knight lands on c4 and the queen comes to b6, checkmate threats on b2 are also handled by that bishop on c1. Carlsen is not afraid of any discovered attacks on his queen. If the knight jumps, the queen will be hanging, but there are no good discovered attacks on that queen possible. Very nice move, bishop c1. Prophylactic. Queen c6 was Caruana's choice, hitting the g2 pawn. The position is equal, but black's problem is that it's hard to see a plan for him. While white's plan is easy to see, it's g4, g5, maybe f4. And try and rip black's head off, as Grandmaster Ashley called it. And indeed, after queen c6, Carlsen played f4 to start that pawn storm. Knight c4, logical move. Now black is attacking white's queen. Queen to d3, and you cannot take on g2 because of queen takes c4 and you lose a piece. So after queen d3, Caruana played queen e4, offering a trade of queens, and g4 was Carlsen's answer. Knight e3 from Caruana, hitting the rook, and the rook went to e1, and now black is forced to swap the queens. Caruana did, c takes, and knight back to d5. Rook e g1 from the world champion, giving black the open e-file. Carlsen is avoiding any rook trades, and he is planning on g5 and knight g4 and go on the attack. At the same time, he's asking Caruana what his plan is. Carlsen has played some amazing retreating moves. We saw bishop e2, bishop c1, knight h2, and now rook e g1. Very original and inventive play from Carlsen. Rook e6 from Caruana and g5. And now Caruana made a mistake. King h7 is a good option here, but Caruana played knight e7, thinking he would stop f4, f5. But he made a calculation error, as f5 is possible, as we'll see. Carlsen played g takes h6 here, and he was very confident here. He thought he was winning, and he went to the confessional booth right at this moment. And here's a picture of what he did. This gesture is known as silencing the haters. It's often made in basketball and in other sports, for example soccer, where a sportsman does this after scoring an important point, after winning a game. Carlsen was convinced he was winning and decided to have some fun, as he called it. You have to take back. You cannot take with the pawn is pinned. So Caruana took with the rook. And he thought f5 was now not possible, but it is possible, attacking the rook. In his calculations, Caruana thought that he could play rook takes h5 here now, but he had missed that then knight g4 wins for white. Let's look at a few variations. Can you take on f5? No, you cannot, because knight h6 is a fork. Winning in exchange, the pawn is pinned, so cannot take the knight. Let's look at something else after knight g4. Can we take the rook? No, we cannot, because then there is knight f6 check, king h8, and the game is already over. This is checkmate. What else? After knight g4, you can also not play rook h8. That's the shortest variation. Knight f6 is already checkmate here. And if you play rook h7, then it's mate in 2. Knight f6 check, king h8 and checkmate. So rook takes h5 does not work. What else is there? Can you play rook f6? Not really. Then we also see knight g4. Rook takes f5, and there we have that exchange win again from white. So what to do after f5? The only reasonable option is the one that Caruana found, and that is rook h7. And here we get to another crucial moment. Here f6 is the winning move. Carlsen said he saw it, his intuition told him that f6 was the right way to play, but when he started calculating he decided on another move, which I'll show in a second. Crucial is now that the black knight cannot go to g8 like we see in the game. For example, knight d5, then knight g4, and this is a winning position for white. Look at all black's pieces. They are very poorly placed, while white's pieces are nicely coordinated and all in the attack. But Carlsen played knight g4 instead of f6. The threat is knight f6, and white wins the exchange again. For example, knight takes f5, knight f6 check. The g-pawn is pinned, king h8, knight takes, king takes, a winning position for white. So Caruana played king h8 to sidestep knight f6 on pinning the g-pawn. And after f6 the knight could go to g8. 3 of black's pieces are on the bottom rank. And the 4th is on h7. It looks absolutely horrible for black. F takes g7 check. Carlsen used a lot of time here looking for the knockout blow, which, very surprisingly, is no longer there. It is another optical illusion that we also saw in the Carlsen So game in round 5. Here you still have to be very careful with black. You cannot take with the king because of the very nice move knight h6 check. The rook gives check to the king. King h8 will be a big blunder because of checkmate in one move. So you have to go to f6 instead, but then the knight on g8 is hanging. White wins a piece. So after f takes g7 check, you have to take with the bishop or with the rook. Caruana took with the rook, which is the right move. Bishop e3 with the idea of bishop d4, bringing the bishop into the attack. But black has c5, taking the d4 square away. Here Carlsen thought again for a long time. He decided on bishop f4 in the end, and only had 1 minute and 30 seconds left for the last 10 moves till move 40. He must have gone through all forcing variations, but he could not find anything, which is not surprising as it simply wasn't there. The win had already slipped away. He could have played h6 instead, attacking the rook, just pushing that passed pawn, rook g6, h7, knight e7, knight h6, but black just takes that knight, and this is nothing for white. This was one of the variations that was looked at in a live broadcast. As said, bishop f4 was Carlsen's choice. Caruana brings the rook into the game. Knight e3 on his way to d5. A pair of rooks was swapped. Rook e6, knight d5, nice square for the knight. Knight f6 challenging that knight, and knight c7 hitting the rook. You cannot go to e7 to counter-attack the knight, because then you have interfered with the protection from the bishop of the d6 pawn. And white is suddenly winning again, so you have to still be careful. Caruana didn't fall for that, of course. He played rook e2. Knight b5, hitting the pawn on a7. Rook back to e6. If you take on a7, then black plays king h7 with counterplay against white's h-pawn. After rook e6, Carlsen played rook f1 and king g8 from Caruana, bringing knight takes h5 into the position without losing that piece through a pin with rook h1. Now that the king is on g8, rook back to h1 is not a pin of that knight if it takes on h5. Knight c7, hitting the rook again, and we get a move repetition. Knight b5, rook e6, and once more. This was the 40th move. Carlsen now had time to think. He saw nothing better than knight b5, and after rook e6, both players shook hands, and this very exciting game ended in a draw. The handshake after the game. It's clear from Carlsen's face that he's not happy. He said after the game, I was absolutely sure I was winning. My intuition told me to go f6 before knight g4, but I miscalculated. I'm not being practical, I can't make up my mind, it's frustrating. A lot was at stake today, I was a bit nervous. My trip to the confessional booth backfired, but I was pretty sure I was winning and wanted to have some fun. Caruana after the game said, I blundered with knight e7 thinking that f5 was not possible because of rook takes h5. We saw that variation. It feels like my position should be fine, but slowly I got pushed back and all endings are unpleasant for black. To defend this you have to play perfectly till the end of the game. And on the confessional booth episode he said, Carlsen thought it was already over, but it was not. So we saw 5 draws in round 7, which means that all players get half a point extra and that the standings are the same. Caruana is leading the Sinquefield Cup with 4.5 out of 7. 4 players are half a point behind. Mamedyarov, Aronyan, Carlsen and Grishuk. Vasylagraf and Anand have drawn all their 7 games so far. So, lost in the first round, then made 6 draws in a row. Nakamura is on 2.5. and Sergei Karyakin has a bad event. Round 8 will be played on Sunday the 26th of August and we'll see Vasylagraf Aronyan, Nakamura Karyakin, Mamedyarov Carlsen, Caruana against Anand and Grishuk against Wesley So. I will be here after the round to tell you what happens. I'd like to draw your attention to a series I'm doing on Chess to Impress, counting down towards the Carlsen-Caruana match in London. It will be the 47th World Championship match and then the series I'm doing is on the first 46 events. Starting with Willem Steinitz against Johannes Zugertort. You can find the playlist here and I hope you will have a look. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply. If you like the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.